Welcome to the Social Dash Engineer podcast number 115.
Woo, 115. It's a great way to launch off maybe the first month of spring.
Is it really?
Yeah, March is spring, guys. Next week.
So since I've moved south, it's really hard for me to determine what season we're in because it's just beautiful all the time.
How about you talk to me in July and let me know if you know what season it is then.
Well, we'll do that. In July, I won't be rubbing that salt in the open wound. But, right now, my only weird revelation from moving has been that when I see the news about like snowmageddon hitting the whole northern part of the U.S., I now have fear. When I lived up there, I was like, whatever, it's going to be a few inches. And now I'm like, oh no, all my family and friends will die in a snowdrift.
Seems probable. That's definitely the leap I would make.
Yeah, it's a weird thing. Anyhow, that's not what we're talking about today. We're talking about an amazing guest that we have on who I'm super excited about. His name is Chase Hughes. Now, Chase, he kind of took a path that's very similar to mine, but in a different field. So he studied nonverbals, behavior, psychology, and he blended it all together and decided to help people learn how to use those skills, whether it was sales or other types of avenues in their life, and created some great training materials and books and courses and things like that. We thought, what better to have Chase on, see how he learned those skills, see how he applies those skills. So let's get Chase on the podcast now and talk to him about that. We are back on the show with our guest, Chase Hughes. Really great to have you here, Chase. Thanks for coming on.
Thanks, man. It's great to be here.
So, of course, we're all very interested in your work, and your book really fits in with what we do here, especially the nonverbal profiling, behavioral analysis part of it. But before we get deep into that, maybe you could just tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got into this field.
So I have been in the military for about 20 years. I just retired recently. And for the better half of that, I've been developing behavioral tools and psychological tools to not only just read people, but to develop a system of influence that was superior to what existed before, because I was designing this stuff for people who were depending on the results with their lives. And I kind of got started doing this just when I was younger. And I basically wanted to understand girls better when I was like 19.
Doesn't how it always starts for us guys.
Incredible. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I just remember one night I had met some girl, and I guess it didn't go my way, but I distinctly remember going home that evening and typing "how to tell when girls like you" into the interwebs. And I think I printed off a 3-foot stack of documents, and it got addicting. And it didn't get addicting that I could see through everybody's facade. I could start seeing through people's social masks. The part that made it addicting was that it just humanized everyone. Everyone became vulnerable at that point to where they were more easily approachable. They were easier to talk to. And it really helped me to come out of my shell.
What was the starting point? I know you're saying about, wanting to learn how to have a little more confidence with girls, but what area of the science did you start looking into first?
Right. So I started out with just studying body language. And I went to a few seminars on some advanced persuasion, and I say that with big air quotes. So I learned a lot about psychology and persuasion over the years. Then I wound up going to college for psychology. And I was always fascinated with seeing a course on the internet that would say, learn how to persuade anyone in under so many minutes. I wasn't rich. I was in the military, so I would save up money and go to this course. And then, it wasn't true. It was great marketing, and it was just a copy-paste course from the stuff that was online. And it was disheartening. And that was one of the reasons I wrote my book, is that I was tired of, because I'd spent over $18,000 on Amazon. I bought every book that has ever been written on behavioral psychology, influence, and persuasion. I'm sure you guys have felt this too. Like, you buy a book and there's only maybe 3 or 4 paragraphs of highlightable information in there. And that was the reason I wrote my book.
Yeah, I've had that experience a few times.
Yeah. So can you define what sets your system of influence apart from what you discovered?
That is a great question. So my system of influence is kind of a mix of all of these philosophies. And it features a lot of new methods that haven't been seen before because I created them. What sets the book apart is that every page is jam-packed with techniques. There's no filler, there's no stories, there's no fluff. The entire thing is like a textbook of human influence. And I think what sets it apart is that most influence training, if you go buy a book, any book on influence, you're going to see that they give you 6 ways to do this. Here are the 7 laws of persuasion. Here's X, Y, and Z. But every one of them, if you look what they all have in common, is that they treat human beings as if every human is the same. So they're giving you techniques that might work maybe on most people. And I was just flabbergasted that nonverbal communication is about 2/3 of communication, and it occupies less than 1% of the persuasion community. So I wanted to come up with a system that harvested tons of personal revealing information about that person and then used that throughout the process.
So it's like a pretty far cry from influencing girls at 20 to, military intelligence. Can you tell us a little bit about that journey for you?
Well, I was stationed overseas and just continuously seeing the stuff online and just in the news about the torture programs and all this other stuff that we're using. And I wanted to put an end to all of this because I invented this system for the extreme end users. I never imagined myself teaching this stuff to civilians. And that was a big catalyst for me, that I saw the current programs that our military was learning or that our intelligence guys were getting trained in. And I wanted to make something better. I knew I had a better system.
Where did you study nonverbals and then figure this is the path? Because this is a big thing of my interest too. And I was just curious, where did you study them and then started tying them into your theories and studies into persuasion and influence?
Are you talking about the sources, like where I started?
Yeah.
Well, the first book I ever read was, I think, the first book that was ever really written. It was called Body Language by Julius Fast. And I think he's the guy who coined the term body language. And I moved on to the book that really hooked me. It was called The Definitive Guide to Body Language by Barbara and Alan Pease. Really, really cool book. And that kind of got me hooked. So I studied under the Paul Ekman Institute and went through all of the nonverbal training seminars that were offered around the country and just kind of accumulated this body of knowledge. And then I got addicted to the point where I wanted to find the limit. Like, what's the book that tells you everything? Because it seems like every book might not really have it all. So I found that with every new book, every new research thing that I would go through, get more information out of it.
Yeah, so I'm a huge fan of Dr. Ekman's work. I agree with you there. So once you start to understand nonverbals and how they work, I'm making an assumption this is what happened to me. You start to then see things almost like a superpower, and you're like, oh, hey, this is what's happening here in this conversation. Is that what happened to you too?
Yes, it really did feel like a superpower. And I figured out ways to tweak it to where we can get even more information out of it. I have a whole program called the 6-Minute X-Ray where you could just talk to a person for 6 minutes and get all of their deepest, darkest fears without them ever saying anything. And as an aside from all of that, that just being able to see some during a conversation when you're learning persuasion or sales or influence, just being able to see that stuff will tell you whether or not your techniques are effective or whether or not you're going to encounter resistance in the future. And a lot of times, especially with people who are in sales, have to wait until the very end of the sale when they're trying to close to find out whether or not they were effective.
So what are some of your metrics for deciding if you're being effective in the moment? Because like in our line of work, sometimes we'll vish people, which is essentially like a voice phishing call. So we call and we are the scam caller and we see if we can elicit some sort of information. So it'd be super interesting to know if there are flags that we should look for in your mind that would tell us if we're on the right path. So do you think you could elaborate on those metrics a little bit?
Sure. Are these the nonverbal metrics that you're asking about?
Well, they wouldn't be, I guess. It would be, I guess, are all the metrics that you look for in a conversation nonverbal, or are there also verbal cues?
I would say 90% are nonverbal. And some of those metrics would be throughout the conversation, you're watching for a decrease in blink rate, which is how often a person blinks. So the average blink rate is 21 blinks per minute. The last time you watched a really great movie, you were probably down around a 7 to 10 per minute. And like during a really hard test in college, you might be up around 55 to 60. Our blink rate changes so often, and we don't really notice the changes. Watching how often a person blinks, you don't have to count the numbers. And that's something a lot of people get wrapped around, is that you just need to see, is the blink rate fast, slow, speeding up, or slowing down? So you know that as you see blink rate start to slow down, you are becoming more interesting, or that person is becoming more captivated by what's going on. So blink rate going up means we're encountering stress. Another great indicator with the eyes is something called shutter speed. And if you think of a fearful animal like a chihuahua, let's say, and you imagine like what a chihuahua's eyelid looks like when it's blinking, it's super fast. So this is the close open rate of the eyelid. And if you imagine a Rottweiler who doesn't give a shit, his eyes are going to close and open a lot slower. So fear makes our eye close and open a lot faster so we can maintain awareness of what's around us. So as a person becomes less fearful about a sale or less suspicious about a vishing attack, I think, is that what you said?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, yeah.
Yeah, so the less fear a person is experiencing, the slower the shutter speed. And this is the speed at which the eyelid shuts and then opens back up again.
I am so self-conscious about my blinking right now. That's really fascinating.
Most likely you're blinking too much, Kat. No, I'm kidding.
Probably, I don't know. I was mesmerized. It was probably very slow. That's the lesson I just took away.
So Chase, do you think that there's a way to learn to control that?
Of course, there's a way. But to control something that's controlled by the same part of your brain that controls heartbeat would take years. And if you pushed it into the conscious realm and tried to control your blink rate during just a normal conversation, it would suck up so much CPU in your brain that you'd be a really crappy conversationalist. So I would say that just trying to maintain or control that would really yank you out of being present in a conversation.
Can you control the emotions and or feelings that cause it to happen? Is that different in your mind?
Yeah, so I think that would also be a year or so of constant practice, or you could just take about 100 milligrams of metoprolol, which is a beta blocker.
I also read that in the military, some of the things that they do is in conditioning soldiers to be less afraid of things that would make, let's say, a normal civilian, being afraid of rapid gunfire. And they condition a soldier to not be afraid of those things. And when your brain doesn't feel the fear, then the physiological response that would naturally occur, like let's say stress blink rate, would then not occur in the soldier. So also, I would imagine, you can correct me if I'm wrong, that would apply to someone in our field or any field, that conditioning or training can help you to physiologically react differently to those stress indicators.
Yeah, absolutely. And when we go through a lot of that training, we're not really training out the fear, we're training in a default. Because a lot of people think that when you go through a training that has tons of repetition, you're going to rise to that, whatever you repeat, or like you're going to rise to the highest point. When in reality, if you get in a gunfight, you will fall to the point of training where you repeated the most. So what we're trying to do is make people, with this conditioning process, is make people default once they have tachycardia and they have something called tachypsyche, which isn't a popular word in the civilian world. It's just a mental overwhelm. They will default to that repetitive training scenario that they've been put through.
This is like a challenge question I'm going to ask because this is always interesting to me. Higher blink rates, which are stress indicators, could also be indicators of like flirtation or arousal. How would you encourage someone who's learning this to be able to differentiate the two? If they're watching the eyes and they're having the conversation, and I kind of know the answer you're going to give, but I want to throw that out there for people who may be listening.
So I would say if you're in a sales meeting with somebody and the eyes start blinking a little bit faster, it's probably not flirtation.
Well, Are you
I would
sure?
say the
though?
context is
No, just
drastically
kidding.
important. Well, then you would look for other indicators like nostril flaring, pupil dilation, lip
Yes.
licking, all of that stuff.
So context is the answer.
Context is always the answer.
Yes.
But you know what? Another really good nonverbal indicator that I've used in a lot of my training and that I don't think I've seen anywhere else is called digital flexion. And this is when you just start curling your fingers. That's all it is. But it's the movement, not the still image of your fingers in a fist. It's the movement of your fingers starting to curl. And digital extension would be the opposite, kind of flattening out your hand. So if you're in a seated position with someone, one of the greatest indicators that's right there in the moment is watching the fingers start to flex and extend to where flexion starts to indicate preemptive disagreement and extension would indicate relaxation and potential agreement. And over the last 10 years, one of the most reliable barometers other than the eyes during a conversation to take a look at.
So now they're learning this, right? Now and let's just say they're looking for some light indicators. As you know, when you're learning, everybody wants to be able to do all of this at once, but you're giving them 1 or 2 tips on things to look for when they're in a conversation. What do they do with that information? So they see something, like let's just pick the one you just taught us. They see blink rate. What do they do with it?
Sure. So they see an increase or decrease. Give me a scenario.
Let's say they see an increase. So they're talking and they see a stress indicator.
Okay, so are we in a sales situation? Well, I guess it wouldn't matter.
Yeah, let's apply it to our industry, right? So in our industry, where we're social engineers, so they're interacting with I hate to use such a negative term, but a target, and we're testing their security posture. So we're approaching the security desk, and our goal is to get through it to get into the company to see if we were able to bypass their security protocols, right? So we're speaking our pretext. We're here to repair the elevator, and we can notice the security guard starts increasing his blink rate. There's the scenario.
Okay, so in this situation, as well as in a sale, as soon as the blink rate starts going up, you are either encountering disbelief or some kind of stress. So as soon as you see an increase in blink rate, you need to take a physical step back, even if it's only an inch, and start to de-escalate whatever thought process they have. Now, there's no way for you to know what thought process they have. So the best way to do it is just kind of take a step back, or if you're seated, lean back a little bit and say, listen, or look, based on what kind of person they are. Say, I know a lot of people might get a little hesitant because X, Y, and Z, but let me reassure you that this, and this. So that you preemptively address their increase in blink rate as soon as you see it. And then you give them an opportunity to object right then and there.
So you said something really fascinating in the middle of that. You said listen or look depending on what kind of person they are, which is a whole other kind of assessment. Could you maybe go in a little bit on what you're thinking in that moment? How are you choosing your words and how did you assess the person for the best word choice?
So when we just have a conversation with a person, people tend to use visual or auditory words, sometimes feeling, but very rarely. So you'll hear people say, look, this is what I see, or that looks good, or they'll use visually descriptive adjectives like it was bright, it was shiny. They'll use visual words, or they'll use auditory words like, listen, something doesn't sound right about this, or it sounds good to me, or we'll talk soon, instead of I'll see you soon. So in the conversation, you can kind of identify what sensory preference that person has, whether it's visual, an auditory, or kind of a feeling word type of person. And if the conversation is not long enough for you to kind of extract some adjectives out of that person, you can just assume that 70% of people are visual and start going with a visual.
And I'm assuming, do you use that in rapport building, essentially, is catering to how they best communicate? You're essentially using the way that they communicate to build rapport with them by communicating in the way that they are most comfortable. Is that the proper assessment?
Yes. We're building rapport and we're kind of using their language, so to speak.
Yeah, that's awesome.
So we're speaking in visual terms because they speak in visual terms.
So now you're a civilian, yes? So where do you use this most these days? The superpower you have.
Well, mostly teaching it. We have a lot of seminars around the country, and occasionally I'll do one-on-one coaching with somebody. And most of the places I use this nowadays is maybe to get a upgrade to first class when I'm flying overseas.
Now, you want to make this the most downloaded podcast ever? Give us that secret.
Yeah, I was like, I'm going to wait. I'll
wait. I want that.
Well, that's really what it comes down to, is that 6-minute discovery process that we have. That's one of the vital things, is to identify where they are on a sensory scale. And then we teach you how to identify their one of 6 human needs that I've come up with. And they are absolutely not an academic assessment of what human beings need. It's just an assessment of the levers you can use to persuade that person. So those 6 needs are intelligence, approval, acceptance, intelligence, pity, and strength or power. And each one of those needs is directly tied to a certain subset of human fears that govern that person's life. So if you can identify someone's need, and I have an entire class on how to just identify people's needs visually without speaking to them. So you can look at a person that's 50 feet away from you and know what their biggest fears are because you were able to identify their needs.
Is it based on nonverbals, or is it based on dress and grooming and things like that?
Both. So it's a lot about dress, grooming, and what kind of way they hold themselves. And then when you start the conversation, it's a lot about the word choice that they use, and all the way down to the pronouns they use during the conversation.
Yeah, I wish you could see me. I want to be like, do me.
Until he does, and then you're like, oh, now I'm depressed.
I know, and I'm having a minor existential crisis for like the 3rd time on a Friday.
Okay, Kat, let's take a quick break from the show and talk about what's going on in the world of social engineer.
Always exciting things.
It is. As a matter of fact, let's see, March. So we just had 2 amazing classes. Our APSE and MLSE class completed for the springtime now, or winter springtime. So super excited about that. But we have future to look to.
Woo.
So what are we looking forward to? Let's take a look at some dates here. We have our OSINT class, which we're really excited about, coming up on the 23rd and 24th of April in Denver, Colorado. Now, guys, there is a whole bunch of seats open in that class. You want to get in there really soon. That's April 23 and 24 in the beautiful Denver, Colorado, where there will be no snow, and it will be wonderful at that time of year.
It's always beautiful. It is truly always beautiful. I'm very well maintained.
Don't listen to anything Kat says, because every time I bring this up, she paints a horrid picture of doom.
It's amazing.
Listen to me, my friends. Me, okay? Not the cat who lives there. Second, if you want to get APSE in this year, there's only 2 more chances for you to do that. So you have 13 through 17 of May, which is in Bristol, UK, a beautiful time of the year in Bristol, and it's a really wonderful little town. That class is about 50% full right now, so if you want in, you're going to have just a couple more weeks after this podcast comes out before the prices go up. And then we have 3 through 6 of August in Black Hat. So our class is there, and that class is about 45% full too. So you're going to want to get into that one. And then after that, there are no more public APSE classes for 2019. So if you're looking for any more public training from us, those are your 3 dates you have for now. So get into one of those. If you want to check that out, you can go to social-engineer.com into the events section.
And you should definitely do it.
You should. I think so also. But I'm a little biased. But anyhow, onward and forward to some more exciting things. DEF CON has been fully launched, our SE Village for DEF CON. So our SECTF is out, and I cannot believe the amount of signups we have. And videos have already started coming in, which is odd because normally by now we're begging people to turn them in. People are definitely on top of their game this year, and they have been turning them in already. It's a little scary.
The Twitterverse seems intense this year.
It does.
It's just going to be amazing.
It does.
So join in the fun.
And I got to say, a huge blend of male versus female this year, which makes me super happy.
Yeah.
Because some years it's definitely biased and leaning more towards the men. A really nice blend this year. So that's out. SECTF for kids and teens are also launched, and we're seeing the signups rolling in for them. So if you're bringing your kids or your teens to DEF CON, get over there and sign up now because we really, really need to see how many numbers we have for those events. And then last but not least, our call for papers for the human track in SE Village is now launched. So you want to get over there and fill out if you want to give a speech. We're trying something brand new this year, 25-minute speeches. So we're going to work with you to get your content really crisp, clean, and exact, getting great content and quick amounts of time out for our village there. So we're looking forward to seeing how we can do that. Starting everything on Thursday this year, with the SECTF kicking off on Thursday as opposed to Friday, Saturday. We're doing Thursday, Friday.
Yeah.
So
It'll be awesome.
excited about that.
I really also cannot stress enough, if you have a kid or a teen who's interested in competing in the SECTF for their age groups, please sign up early. Unfortunately, last year we had to turn people away at the door who wanted to sign up on site because we ran out of space. We had like 22 teens or something crazy. We couldn't do any more. So definitely it's super fun. And if they're all interested, please sign up ahead of time so that we make sure that we have all of the things for the younger people.
And they put us over at Bally's on the whole Las Vegas ballroom on level 3. We literally have almost 11,000 square feet, people.
Crazy amount of space.
So I need you to help me prove to them that we can fill even that. So let's do it this year, okay? Last but not least, if you're curious, maybe thinking, do I want to come all the way out to DEF CON and see an SE Village? Check out our documentary. All 3 parts have been released. You can check that out. We'll have links to that in the show notes as well as on our website. But we have the SE Village documentary, all 3 parts now being released. You can take a look at what goes on inside of an SE Village. I think that is about it. So we should probably get back to the guest and our show. So it's a quick profiling tool that you can use in obviously a non-malicious way, because it sounds like it can help in just communicating every day with people.
Sure. A lot of my clients are therapists.
Oh, are they? Really? Yeah, I was going to ask about what the average use of it was. So therapy's one. It sounds like sales is another. Are there other fields that tend to gravitate towards using these skills?
Yeah. So we have had an influx of social engineers in my last 2 seminars.
There we are.
And that's one of the fastest growing of my customer base, and which I've never imagined I'd be teaching this to civilians. I developed this for military applications, and I'm starting to discover that our new programs have therapeutic applications. I've had surgeons come to my class just trying to learn how to communicate with their patients and their patients' families better. I'd say 60% of the people are business oriented, where they want to learn how to either manage better or become better sales team members. And I think once you're able to see behind someone's social mask, and I have probably a 5-minute long technique to pull someone's social mask off. And I think once you're able to do that, it really changes the way you see human beings forever. And I know that, everyone says like, oh, everyone wears a social mask. But once you're able to see it, it's really different than just reading it on an internet article or something like that. Especially being able to pull someone's social mask off. It's fearful. It's a really fearful experience when that person knows they're exposed. And when they are experiencing that fear, and then there's no judgment, they're not being judged, and there's still rapport, and you're not yelling at them. It's incredible that the next conversation they have with somebody else, they will be more likely to be more open and authentic. So you really are given an opportunity to leave people better than you found them.
Removing a social mask, the carefully constructed version of who you are in society, is very scary. How do you feel a lot of your students use those lessons? Do they leave class? How do you feel about them when they leave class? I'm just curious.
So I think a lot of the students are walking out and using this in a good way, whether it be in a sales context or especially in therapy, because I hammer down really hard on integrity throughout the entire course.
Yeah, that's awesome, because it is also very liberating to be able to be yourself and to empower people to share that with others. So that's really awesome. It's good to hear.
It is really cool to see as well. When you watch a person take it off and they haven't done it in 10 years, they even wear the social mask. A lot of us do when we look at ourselves in the mirror. We want to maintain the self-image to a degree. And then we kind of show that person that, hey, you don't need to wear it. You're fine. And I think, the overall objective of my course, like one of my 3-day courses, is to turn a human being into an extremely compliant and fully open person, where they will make decisions a little bit faster. And part of that process is taking that social mask off and letting them just breathe without it, and showing them that, the air is fine if you take it off.
Yeah. How do you define the difference between compliance and openness?
The difference is that openness is receptivity. Like a person's completely receptive to the outside environment without looking internally. So they're living in front of their eyes. And a compliance is just a willingness to cooperate or obey another human being.
And do those things always go hand in hand in your book, or can you be open and not be compliant, or vice versa?
Yes. So the openness is the first thing that we do, which leads them to be more receptive to the influence techniques that manufacture compliance.
That's awesome. Yeah, that's really
Thank you.
fascinating. Like,
Thank you.
I'm like, tell me how to do my job better right now.
Yeah.
You have 10
Yeah,
minutes.
I was just letting you go. I was like, this is good. Your questions
Yeah.
are great. I was like, wow. What's the name of your book?
My book is called The Ellipsis Manual.
And where did you come up with the title? What was the motivator behind that title?
The word ellipsis is just the 3 dots. So like when somebody's typing to you an iMessage and they haven't sent it yet,
Yep.
those little dancing dots, that's called an ellipsis. And if you see it in written text, it means removed or omitted language. So I decided to name my company Ellipsis because it represents what is omitted or removed or kind of language that people can't see. And I thought it sounded cool. So that was just another big win.
That's very clever. I really appreciate that. That's awesome.
Yeah, it's always nice to get the background story sometimes, right? Because sometimes you get a really cool story like that.
Yeah.
Which is quite fascinating and interesting.
Thank you.
And do you discuss all of these things, like your 6-minute X-ray and the other things that we talked about in that book?
All of that is in there. Yeah. And every page has stuff that you can highlight on it. There's no filler in that entire book. And I think, one of the 1-star reviews I got on Amazon is that this book is more of a manual than a book. And the title of my book is literally The Ellipsis Manual.
You're like, I fulfilled exactly what I was going for. Thank you. But why are you giving me 1 star?
Yeah.
I don't know if you do this often, but after my first book, I was reading all the reviews, and eventually I just stopped because I realized that people will leave bad reviews for totally ridiculous reasons. I mean, I have a 1-star review on one of my books because the book came wet from Amazon. And it's like, this book sucks. It came wet in the mail and Amazon's horrible. And I'm like, I got a 1-star review because you guys delivered a wet book. Like, this is terrible, Like, one of my 1-star reviews is not even my fault, Like,
Oh my God.
I just stopped reading them after a while because it was like, man, you get yourself worked up. But yeah, sometimes they're funny. Sometimes you get some really funny ones.
That's so true.
People really love to put their opinions out there.
Absolutely. Since we're on the topic here of this creating openness, there's a couple of techniques that I teach that only take a few minutes, and you could, like, your listeners could take them home today and use some of this stuff.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Would love that.
So first, I would say in a conversation, if you're talking to another person, just mentioning how people who are more relaxed breathe into their abdomens will make them start breathing into their abdomen. And second, mentioning how good of posture one of your friends always has will make this person, or just mentioning somebody with good posture, will make the other person sit up a little more straight.
Can I tell you something fascinating about that topic?
Yeah.
So I just started seeing a vocal coach because I do so much speaking and training and I lose my voice all the time. And he literally reconfirmed everything you just said is actual science. So my whole problem in losing my voice is I do exactly what you just said that non-relaxed people do, which is I don't breathe into my abdomen. I breathe only into my chest. And when you breathe only into your chest, not only is it a stressor, but it really stresses your vocal cords, which causes you to lose your voice.
Wow.
And when you said that, I'm like, oh man, this is like crazy that you're bringing this up. And I literally just learned this the other day from my guy who was telling me, yeah, this is why you lose your voice all the time. You're doing this wrong.
I had no idea that there was some kind of correlation there.
Yeah, there's a correlation. When you breathe only into your chest, you restrict the amount of air that flows through your vocal cords. So they have to stretch more in order to make the words. And it creates stress and friction on your vocal cords, which is why I lose my voice all the time when I give speeches.
Oh my gosh.
So breathing into your abdomen is actually the way we were meant. That's why you'll see singers and professional speakers and people who can speak for like 8 hours a day they breathe into their abdomen.
Wow.
So just more proof to your point
Yeah.
about how valuable that is.
That is really fascinating.
Yeah.
And you know who else breathes into their abdomen?
Who's that?
Sleeping babies.
Huh.
Do you ever watch a baby sleep? It's just their belly that goes up and down when they breathe. So like the more relaxed we are, the more we breathe into our abdomen. It's so true. And when you get someone to physiologically start exhibiting the signs of relaxation and excitement or openness, you know the psychology starts to follow.
100%.
That's why one of the main things that we teach is from the very beginning of the interaction, as soon as you shake that person's hand, you're going to step to the side, even if it's just a little bit, to make that person reorient their shoulders, even if it's an inch towards you. You're going to start this process we call behavioral entrainment from the first second of the interaction. So it would come like that. And then a few seconds later, when you ask them something and they're answering a question with something they're proud of or that they're bragging about or something that they really like, that's when they are the most vulnerable, because once they're talking about something they are proud of, you are holding the key to the validation for what they're saying, which means anytime a person is talking about something they like or something they're proud of, if you take a small step back or to the side, that person is 10 times more likely to reorient their body to you, because when they're bragging, they are selling you. So during these parts of them talking about something positive, that's a quick moment in time when you can get that behavioral compliance to just move and have them move. So you're creating a pattern of physiological compliance, which will eventually lead to psychological compliance.
So are you suggesting that during that moment that you would move to the side, or that you would face them more to show them that validation? Which one are you suggesting?
I would never stop facing them anymore. So me just stepping to the side a little bit, I would continue to face them. Or me stepping back and just kind of creating a little social vacuum for them to fill in, to step forward during the conversation.
Excellent.
Yeah. So I'm curious, you've referenced like your book title and this concept of 6 minutes. Does it take 6 minutes, or is that just an average, or is that the best amount of information you can get? Like, why that title?
6 minutes is about the average to get all of the data. And there is a ton of data. And the person's deepest fears are just the beginning. There's a lot of stuff that we can get just from a lot of psychological research that I didn't do, that just other people never put together and kind of combined with all these nonverbal tactics. So it's about 6 minutes. So it's all the data you can get within 6 minutes.
So we also run trainings and we get some questions along the following line, which is, how do you remember the answers to all of these flags? So you're talking about how much information you gather in this relatively short amount of time. Do you have any tips for how you're recording it, or how you're recording the sentiments in your head at least?
Yes. So we have a 6-minute checklist. So during training, they will listen to like 40 or 50 sample conversations and fill out one of these checklists so they can see how easy it is. And we also, like when a person gestures with their left side when they're doing something, or right side when they're doing something, that's another technique that we have them memorize. But we just teach them to make a circle with that hand and hold it for just a minute, so they remember that that's the side they need to gesture on when it's time to close the sale, or when it's time to convince that person not to do something. So there's a lot of little tricks that we have along the way, but I think it's just experience. Of course, everyone who comes to a course wants to walk out the door without ever having to do any homework and be like, I want all the skills right away. Like, I want the 3-day course on how to be a heart surgeon.
Sounds about right.
Huh?
And that's something like, that's the first 5 minutes of every seminar I teach. And I say, like, this is an informational course. You're going to walk out of here with a shitload of skills, but you won't be able to use them all right away or combine them all right away. You have to practice. And this is not like a course in jogging where you can go home and jog. This is an art, and it's a very complex art. You've got to master it, just like mastering a musical instrument. It takes a little while.
Do you have advice for where to practice these skills? Or, if somebody wants to go and assign themselves homework, how do they practice in real life?
Anytime you want to practice behavior reading, if it's just behavior, I would use YouTube, because The people can't look back at you and think that you're creepy for staring at them. And if you want to see like a list of nervous behaviors, I would watch almost any guest get interviewed by Conan O'Brien. He's got a fantastic ability to kind of manufacture these nervous behaviors in people. And when you're talking about using this stuff in an influence capacity, I would just have conversations with strangers all the time, as much as you possibly can. Try to learn. I mean, be genuinely interested in other people, and you'll be surprised. You can practice this stuff on a daily basis. And if some people are scared, I would just go to a place where there are employees there that you can talk to.
Yeah, that's awesome.
That's great advice, and it's advice that we always say and unplanted from you. So it's great to kind of have someone saying the same thing, and now we can be like, you see, great minds think alike. And this is what they always think, well, that's not really fair. And I'm like, but that's exactly how you practice these skills on people.
I've got another friend. His name is David Barron. He uses this stuff nowadays when telemarketers call him. He will challenge himself to talk that telemarketer into quitting their job. And he has dozens of recordings of him doing it. It's fantastic.
It's incredible. So over the course of the podcast, you have said that you don't include your stories in the book and that you go to your training and you get, a bunch of great takeaways. But I can only imagine that after, starting with a fascination in the opposite sex and then moving through a 20-year military career, that you have amazing stories. Do you ever share them?
Very rarely. And some of the stories are on a 65-year non-disclosure agreement that I haven't lived out yet. A lot of this stuff is stuff that people can apply every day. And something that we see on a regular basis, and I'm sure I'm going to call some people out here, but I get phone calls, and I'm sure you guys do too, of like, hey, I really want like the top of the line techniques here. And the last time this happened to me, the guy, I knew he was calling from an iPhone because, the little FaceTime camera doesn't have a question mark on it.
Oh, yeah.
When you're calling. And I said, all right, are you open for a FaceTime? And he said, yeah, okay. So I FaceTimed him and I had him walk me to his bedroom. And I said, you want to control another human being and you can't even make your own bed when you get out of bed in the morning. But you want to take full control of another human being. You have no control over yourself. Having that level of influence and persuasion over another human being, that level of control has to start with yourself. You have to have that much control over you before you have that level of control over another human being. Period.
I would agree. And, I think if I don't watch the clock, we could probably continue for a couple hours, and that would definitely break the promise I said to you. So I'm watching and saying, oops, okay. So I want to do a couple things before we have to let you go. First, people I think are going to be very interested in this topic and learning more about you. So where can they find out about your trainings that you spoke about and just about the work you're doing?
Yeah, thank you. It's chasehughes.com, just my website. We've got all the courses on there, the link to the book and everything else. There's a ton of free stuff on there, and there's not a single advertisement from anybody else on my entire website. So enjoy.
Excellent. We'll make sure we put that in the show notes. Now, besides your book, which we'll also put a link to that directly into the show notes, is we always like to ask our podcast guests, because our listeners like to read a lot. And we have a now 9-year running list of books that have been recommended over the 114 episodes so far of our podcast. So do you have it doesn't have to even be about the topic that we just spoke about. It could just be about a book that you read that you loved. Do you have a book recommendation that you would give to the people who listen?
Absolutely, man. This book is extremely unconventional, and it wasn't even written about humans, but it is one of the best books on leadership I have ever read. I don't want it to get confused with anybody. These qualities of leadership are probably, if I could list the top 3 qualities in a social engineer, leadership would be number 1. And that just means that natural leadership ability. But this book is called Be the Pack Leader by Cesar Milan.
I love dogs, so totally on board.
I don't know if Pat's going to hate me because she's a dog trainer, but I love that guy.
The level of controlling your own energy and your own internal state in this book and teaching you how to be centered and in composure all the time. I've never seen in any other book. And Cesar Milan, even though he's talking about dog training, this is a fantastic book. I've read it several times and I've recommended it hundreds of times to people.
So treat everyone like a dog is basically the lesson.
I feel like the lesson is a little bit bigger.
Oh, is it? Okay, because I'm thinking that is now the podcast title. Treat everyone like a dog with Chase Hughes.
It's really funny. So, funnily enough, Chase, I recently, in our last newsletter for our social engineering organization, I compared some SE tactics to dog training because that's also my hobby. So it's very in line with that message as well, and the value of essentially you can train people and animals really well by creating events. And so there's so many parallels. It's just really timely.
Absolutely.
I think he did it on you. Kat.
Yeah, I'm sure it's me.
The key message here is about leadership. Animals and humans respond to composure and leadership.
I like that. Yeah, that's awesome.
He read your 6 minutes and he read your fears and your greatest hopes and aspirations, and he knew you like dogs, and now he just pulled that out.
I'm sure he could do that. I feel like maybe he didn't.
No, it's a true story.
All right, yeah.
That's how I'm playing this whole podcast.
I like it, yes.
Chase, this was fascinating. Really, really excellent. I so appreciate you making the time to come on and sharing all this with us.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, man. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, well, we'll talk again soon.
Thanks, man.
Thank you.
Bye.
Another great podcast with Chase. That was a really good one.
Super amazing. Honestly, I just always feel so good when we have tangible things that everyone could go practice. I know I'll go practice a lot of his recommended skills. And yeah, I'm so grateful when people are like, here, let me tell you a step-by-step homework assignment. I'm like, yes, I love homework.
Yeah, I think we need to have him on and just have a podcast where we do that.
Yeah, that'd be amazing. I can only imagine how much people would get out of it.
Yeah, actually, if you're listening and you like that idea, let us know, because I'm curious to see if you would like to see us have him back on and have a actionable podcast where we just spend the whole time. Here's a tip 1, here's tip 2, go do these things. And also, I loved the unique book recommendation. Not often do we get a book recommendation that is not written for humans.
Yeah. Well, I'm pretty sure it was still written for humans.
Yes, okay, yeah. Well, you know what I mean.
I do, but if Buffy could start reading all of my stuff, that'd be great.
If you could teach her to write reports.
Oh my gosh, that would be so handy. They could actually earn their keep as opposed to just being like, excuse me, my bed isn't fluffed.
Great. Yeah. Who's the pack leader there?
I know. Definitely not me. I'm okay seeing my own failures. It's better to know them.
Well, if you want to follow us, you can find Kat Murdoch at...
Kat Murdoch. That's the O in Murdoch is a 0 and Kat with a C.
Excellent. Yes, that's important because I've had people actually email me asking and spelling your name with a K.
Oh, well, yes, no. Sadly, I've gone off, non-standard here. Cat like the animal.
You actually didn't make that up. It's your parents doing that.
Yeah.
So it's not like you did this to people just to make them mad.
I did not. If you're mad at me, if you're mad about my name, I'm really sorry.
This is not her fault, okay, people? So you don't have to get angry. This is what was given to her, okay?
Yeah, it's just the role I've been handed.
Now, you can be mad at her for her Twitter handle, but that's about it, okay? Now, if you want to follow me, it's Human Hacker, and you have the corporate at SOC Engineer Inc. and Innocent.org for the Innocent Lives Foundation. www.social-engineer.org and www-socialengineer.com for our corporate stuff. I think that's about it. So, till next month, we'll see you.